Tall Tale TV. Whole Lotta Shakin', a Tony Mandolin short story by Robert Beers, Chapter 6. In the morning, we could find no trace of Sam Clemens, Roosevelt, or Bain, which led the big guy and me to think about doing some exploring. As far as we were concerned, this was a whole new city, practically a whole new culture, and we had money, which we did not have when we first arrived. Frankie suggested we check out Fisherman's Wharf, saying he had a hankering for some real Old West sourdough and Dungeness. I quite agreed. Once you experience that combination, washed down with a beer, nothing else can really take its place. The Embarcadero was there. In fact, it seemed somewhat unchanged from my day, except for the mode of transportation. We grabbed a bus, drawn by 4 matched draft horses, paid our penny, and rode along, enjoying the sights. What I did notice was there were a lot more buildings right up against the water. Boarding houses, body houses, and dens of even less repute. I'd heard it said that the 1906 earthquake destroyed the last vestiges of the San Francisco Barbary Coast. Just as we approached the end of the Embarcadero, before the road took its drastic 90-degree turn to the left, I said to Frankie, "There we are, an authentic crab shack." He said, "Where?" And then he was off the bus and walking. As we'd been passengers on the running board, it was easy to simply step off and follow. Those old buggies didn't get up to speeds much past 10 miles an hour, about an athlete's jogging pace. But the old horses had been taking it easy, and so much the better. Oh, heaven in a scent! The smell of the boiling crab had my mouth watering, and because of the time of day, the round loaves of bread were still warm and released steam when you cracked them open. I had to wonder, what would the Crabbers Association say if I told them I knew of a shack that sold crab and sourdough with a beer for 5 cents? If Swifthook had been there, she would have honestly reported that the big guy and I made pigs of ourselves. I was pretty peckish, and even at that, I could only put away 2 crabs. Those things were huge. Frankie, on the other hand, polished off 4 and was looking wistfully at a 5th when I paid the guy. He said, a bit wide-eyed, "You know, if you fellas ever want to come back, I'm always here, and let your families know about me, okay?" I'm sure he saw future retirement in our custom alone. And then I looked up and saw the sign over the shack, Mandolins. I said, the feeling of destiny washing through me, "Oh, I sure will." Then Frankie said, "Can we go look at the ships?" I was more than happy to be dragged away. The butterflies were flapping up a storm. It is amazing how the most harmless-sounding requests can turn into gut-wrenching episodes in a life that has seen far too many gut-wrenching episodes. In 1906, the docks were basically a boardwalk that stretched from across Alcatraz Island all the way south to Hunters Point. Essentially miles and miles of ships, docks, warehouses, and stalls, as well as bars and other assorted less than civil and healthy entertainments. So, looking at the ships was one thing. Dealing with the types who frequented the stalls and boozers across from the ships was something else altogether. Frankie, totally engrossed in the lines and details of a 4-masted clipper slipping through the bay, did not see the laughing knot of men and saloon girls coming out of the bar until it was too late. They all went down in a tangle of legs, shouting and cursing. It was amazing. The girls had a better command of the invective than the men. One of the men, a moderately tall, thin fellow, wearing a Western-style duster and a low-slung revolver in a rather fancy holster, looked around and demanded, "Who's the clumsy oaf who did that? Where is the idiot?" I could feel the ice forming in my gut. The gunslinger. Frankie, not the greatest in understanding the techniques of survival, said, holding up his hand, I think that was me. Sorry." Then he noticed who it was, and added, "Again?" "Sorry," the guy responded, acting even more insulted. "Sorry? Is that all you gotta say, darky? Who's gonna pay for the damage to my coat, or these young ladies' gowns?" Then he added, in about as insulting a tone as possible, "Boy." It was obvious to anyone watching. The saloon girls were neither ladies nor young. As for the guy's coat, It would have been easier to just apply a new layer of dirt to where the fall had scraped some off.
You tell him, Jimmy.
The saloon girl with the worst mouth brushed back a lock of greasy hair.
He's an uppity darky. Teach that boy a lesson.
Frankie stiffened. I didn't blame him.
I'll be going now,
he said coldly. The one they called Jimmy drew the gun from its holster and cocked it in one smooth motion.
Where you going, boy? You ain't apologized near enough.
He looked Frankie up and down.
Boy, you are a big one, ain't ya? What's with the gentleman clothes? Is that how they're dressing you darkies these days? Well, you gotta do better than just, I'm sorry, boy. That's no way to act around your betters, even if they's dressing you like some jumped-up pet.
If he hadn't been holding that gun on the big guy, Frankie would have cleaned his clock, and I would have cheered. Frankie growled.
Tell you what, put that gun down, and we'll see who's the better man.
The crowd murmured. Seems a black man wasn't supposed to talk back. Jimmy growled back, his eyes narrowing.
Why don't you strap on a gun and try me, boy?
I don't like guns,
Frankie said.
Well,
Jimmy laughed.
Too damn bad, boy, 'cause I sure do.
He whirled the revolver in his hand, finishing with it pointed at Frankie's head. I reached for my own gun. I'd bought a shoulder holster to go along with the suit, just in case. It seemed I was right. The big guy said,
No, Tony, let me handle this.
Jimmy looked at me and sneered.
What, white men aren't good enough for you? You just wait your turn, Tony. I'll deal with you next.
And then he laughed.
Someone hand this darky a gun.
A gun in its belt was passed out of the crowd. We were now surrounded by what looked like over 100 people, all of them nearly salivating at the unexpected free show.
Frankie, I said, this guy's an obvious gunfighter. He's probably killed dozens of people.
I know what I'm doing, Tony,
Frankie said, strapping on the gun. The belt just managed to fit. There was no slack. Jimmy called out,
All right, boy. Let's just open up a bit of room and make it more interesting, okay?
The crowd behind us gave way as Frankie stepped backward. 1, 2, 3 times. Jimmy, the gunfighter, did the same, making the space between them a good 30 feet thereabouts. The gunfighter called out, his hand poised over the butt of his gun.
Make your play, boy. That bay behind you'll make a nice watery grave.
Frankie flipped his coat out of the way of the gun resting on his hip, nodded, and said,
Call me boy. Just one more time.
Something in his voice was familiar. A natural mimic, the big guy had shifted character. Jimmy smiled big and then sneered.
Make your play, boy.
His hand darted to the gun. Instantly, there was the sound of a shot, and Jimmy's gun exploded in its holster. I looked, and Frankie stood there, his borrowed gun in his hand, posed as if he was right out of an Old West film. Jimmy was blinking and staring at the ruins of his gun belt. His mouth dropped open in shock, his hand still poised to draw.
Call me sir.
I wanted to clap and cheer. Frankie still had the gun aimed, his hand rock steady at about waist level.
Huh?
Jimmy looked across at the big guy.
What did you say?
I said,
Frankie growled, clicking back the hammer of his gun. It sounded unusually loud in the silence. The crowd had become like statues.
Call me sir.
Jimmy's eyes widened, and he babbled.
Yes, sir, I mean, sir.
Now,
Frankie said.
Take off your gun belt.
Jimmy did so, holding it by the buckle. Frankie waved his gun.
Over to the water.
Jimmy shuffled over to the edge of the dock.
Drop it.
Jimmy hesitated. Frankie raised his aim and growled, in the deadliest voice I'd ever heard come from him.
Drop it or die!
Jimmy dropped the belt, and then I heard the splash. Frankie said,
You'll be leaving town now, won't you, boy?
I'd never seen a man suddenly become so miserable. Jimmy's head drooped to his chest, and he sobbed.
Yes.
Good,
Frankie said, in that same deadly tone.
Now, get.
As Jimmy and his friends left the dock, we were mobbed by a horde of brand new fans, all of them wanting to know the big guy's name. Did he know Bill Hickok, the Earp Boys, and so on? A few wondered if he was the famous Bass Reeves. One man asked if he knew he was faster than Killin' Jim Miller when he drew on him. Frankie said,
Who?
And the crowd laughed. They didn't realize he was being honest. A woman pushed through the crowd and said, But you told him you didn't like guns. Frankie said,
I don't. I never said I didn't know how to use them.
I grabbed him before he had any more chances to quote Hollywood. Whoever had passed him the gun and belt never asked for it back. As we got back onto the Embarcadero, I asked,
All right, I know you're fast, Frankie. I've seen you move. But where in the hell did you learn to draw and shoot like that?
He looked a little embarrassed.
Would you believe me if I said 7-Eleven?
No,
I said, spacing the words.
I would not. And you're not Michael J. Fox. Neither are you Tom Selleck.
Then he said,
It was for that Castro Theater revival of Annie Get Your Gun. Like I said, I played Frank.
I filled in the blanks.
And you and the other cast members got to fooling around with quick draw contests, right? Well, I guess they weren't kidding about you being fast.
He nodded, blushing. I said,
Big guy, that is a story we want to save for the 21st century.
Walking up the sidewalks into the area just below where Coit Tower would be built, I saw a shop that I immediately recognized. I grabbed Frankie by the arm and said,
Come on, we gotta go.
He resisted.
But why? What's wrong?
I pointed at the shop.
Butterflies, big guy. Tons and tons of butterflies.
Frankie noticed the sign.
Mandolin and Sons,
he read.
Is that your great-grandfather's place? I thought they ran a crab shack.
I nodded.
Yes, but this is the main office and the bakery, and I cannot take the chance of doing or saying anything that might make a change. I would really prefer to exist, thank you.
Shop's closed today. Pop's at the park checking out the headhunters. Cold washed through me. That had to be my grandfather as a teenager, or my great-uncle, his brother. Turning, I said,
Thanks, I heard he does real good work.
The young man said, Best in the city, and I'm getting pretty good myself. Authentic old country flavor, not even the Gabbiati can match it. I nodded.
I know. Well, thanks anyway. Oh, can I make a suggestion?
He replied, shrugging. It's a free country. I asked,
Does your family like stargazing?
He answered, You kidding? The old man's crazy for it.
Well then, I happen to know there is a great chance of clear skies around April 17th. And if you can be, say, in the grass in Golden Gate Park before dawn on the 18th, you might just catch sight of a meteor shower.
Wow, he said, his eyes widening in anticipation. Thanks, mister. I chuckled.
Don't mention it.
As we headed back down the hill, Frankie punched me lightly in the arm.
Butterflies?
I grumbled.
So sue me. It could be that was why they survived.
When we arrived back at the hotel, Miss Swifthook was waiting for us in the lobby. She hurried over as we walked through the lobby door.
Mr. Mandolin,
she called out. I stopped and tipped my hat.
Miss Swifthook.
She said,
About that money.
I smiled.
What money?
I want to apologize for my temper yesterday, she rushed on. I'm sure you have no idea what it is to have to fight uphill for every scrap of dignity as a woman does in this world. I know my father's position gives me an edge over most, but... I stopped her.
Actually, I do. I have friends and associates who are not men, and I am well aware of how it can be. Believe me, I would never put you into a place where you felt uncomfortable. That is not me.
She nodded. That's what Mr. Bain said, glancing in the direction of the bar. Then she added, I'm a little worried about him. Something must have happened. Alarm bells started up in my mind.
What do you mean?
He's been drinking, heavily. He was pretty drunk when he said you were someone I could trust. Probably the only one.
Tony,
Frankie said.
I know, big guy. Thanks, Miss Swifthook. It seems we're needed. If I don't see you again...
She smiled and just said, Thank you. Bain looked a hell of a lot more familiar when I saw him. Frankie's,
uh-oh,
was right on the money. Bain's eyes, their familiar bloodshot red, looked up at us as we approached.
Jackson,
he slurred.
So sorry to have you see me like this.
Then he focused on me.
Mandolin.
His head dropped and then came back up.
A man I can trust. Don't like, but can trust.
There was a clank, and then I saw the whiskey bottle roll across the marble. And then I heard the snores start up. I looked at Frankie and said,
"Let's get him to bed."
Bane was never a lightweight, but he weighed more a century younger in his drinking than he did back when I first knew him. Fortunately for me, Frankie probably could have used Bane's weight as his lighter barbells. With a big guy carrying Bane as if he was a sleeping child, I ran point and got us to the room with only a slightly outrageous amount of tipping for silence. The nice thing about luxury hotels is the couches in the rooms can easily double as beds, and that's where we deposited Bane. It was the screaming that woke me. I bolted upright and was out of the bedroom before my eyes were all the way open. Bane was thrashing on the couch, his mouth open in fear, but his eyes were shut tight. For a normal person, all you do is wake them and tell them it's all right. It was just a nightmare. The problem here was, Bane, as a wizard, could fry me crispy while he was apologizing.
"Maeve!"
he screamed again.
"No!"
Knowing Bane's history, I also knew the source of his nightmare. He wasn't as much as a drunk as he was when I knew him in the future, but that had been because just one of his children was alive. The last one he'd had to kill as a penance for having them with Maeve, his fey lover. It seemed a wizard getting it on with one of the fairy queens produced monsters as the result, and I'm not just talking about their personalities. I walked over to one of the chairs and sat down. Sleeping, as far as I was concerned, was over. I hoped Bane would be able to rest rather than dream. I was wearing my usual pajamas, meaning skin, so I grabbed an Afghan off the back of the chair and wrapped myself in it. He eventually did settle down, but the end result was me listening to an incredibly aggravating variety and litany of snores. I was about ready to consider a glass of water in his face when his eyes opened.
"Mandolin,"
he said, sitting up.
"What are you doing in my room?"
"It's my room," I said, in as flat a tone as possible, which was easy since I was feeling really pissed off.
"Your room?"
he asked, looking around, and then he winced.
"God, my head."
"Hungover," I said.
"Huh?"
"Hungover," I repeated, "probably due to that bottle you polished off down in the bar." He nodded, and then winced again.
"Thinking about your kids, right?"
I probably shouldn't have said that, because his eyes whipped around to center on me, and those little blue arcs of power I knew all too well danced around his fingers.
"What do you know about my children?"
he snarled. In for a penny and all that.
"I know,"
I said carefully.
"all about them, because you told me. I know about Maeve, the curse, and your penance, and I have to say, I am really, really sorry. You don't know how sorry."
"Yes, I do," he said. "I read your aura." His head dropped again, and then, still looking down at his feet, he asked, "How do you know all this?" That penny just kept getting bigger.
"Because, besides from being from the future, as I said, you and I have been in quite a few fights together, including one against Surtur."
His head came up, and his eyes widened. "Mandolin, there must be a hell of a lot more to you than meets the eye." I shrugged.
"No, you and Odin had a lot to do with that."
I fished out the Ankh necklace he'd made for me and waggled it. "Odin, too?" He put his head in his hands. "A bit too much at one time, Mandolin. I need some coffee."
"Sounds good,"
I said, standing up. Bane looked at me and muttered, "You might want to put some pants on. You're not that attractive." I got dressed, collected Frankie, and we met Bane down at the Palm Court. 1 coffee was poured, and 2 substantial breakfasts were ordered. Bane said, "I've been thinking about that blue goop you told me about, and that may have been what triggered my bout yesterday, and the nightmares."
"Nightmares?"
Frankie asked. Bane nodded. "One of the mixed blessings that come with being one of my kind is the memory. We never forget anything, including our dreams and nightmares. They can be played back at will, as if we were there all over again.
Oh, you poor man,
Frankie said. Bane smiled sadly at him. Thank you, Jackson. I mean that. Again I thought, oh, what a century makes.
What about the blue goop?
I asked. I think it's tied to one of my offspring, and it may be what sent you back to this time, Bane said, sipping some more coffee. Oh, that hits the spot. I don't know how you two can be facing food right now.
We didn't drink?
Frankie suggested. Bane nodded and sipped again. Over an incredible breakfast of steak, eggs, hash browns, and sourdough toast, Bane told us about the particular offspring from his liaison with Maeve, the Fairy Queen. He was born with a certain power, the ability to manipulate time. He managed to get Puck, the jester of the fairy court, to build him a device to focus that power. He shoots a blob of energy, a sort of blue plasma whose effect is to send the victim back in time by a century or more. Why? I asked. He shrugged. Can't attack him if you've died of old age, can you? I nodded.
But that's not the whole story, is it?
No, he sighed. As with the rest, the thing I sired may look human, but that's as far as it goes. He revels in terror, in bullying the weak, the defenseless, and that's when he's feeling charitable. And he's also a coward, which is why he had the weapon built.
Is that why we wound up here?
Frankie asked.
Is there any way to get back home?
Bane nodded and sighed. Afraid not, Jackson. Not unless you can call up an earthquake, powerful enough to destroy this city on command. He noticed the look the big guy and I gave each other. What? He asked, just a bit of the old Bane growl coming through. Frankie said.
We know when that is going to happen.
Bane looked at me. What does he mean? I sighed, almost like he had earlier, and recited.
On April 18th at 5:12 a.m., a magnitude 7.8 earthquake will destroy about 80% of the city and kill over 3,000 people. The resulting fires will leave the entire city, except for a few buildings and homes, in ruins.
That sounds like lecture notes, he muttered. I shrugged.
Wikipedia,
I said.
Mostly.
Huh?
Forget it, I said. It just means that where Frankie and I are from, the earthquake that's going to happen is an event in history. We know when, and we know where it is roughly centered.
Well then, Bane said, I do believe I can help you get back home. Whole Lotta Shaken is a short story by Robert Lee Beers, author of the Tony Mandolin Mysteries, the best unknown supernatural mystery series on the planet. The Tony Mandolin Mysteries take place in and around today's San Francisco, and in style are a mashup of Nero Wolfe, Harry Dresden, and the Vimes novels of the immortal Sir Terry Pratchett. There are 7 finished novels in the series, an 8th in the works, and several short stories offered for free on Kindle Unlimited. If you go to asmbeers.wixsite.com/RobertLeeBeers, everything is there and more. Week 6 of 7. I can't believe I've been reading this story for a month and a half already. It went by so quick. We've just got one more episode to go, so make sure to subscribe and tune in next week for the climax. I'm Chris Herron, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.